Hi and welcome back. Today I'm going to start assembling some of the less critical parts of the lock, and once I have those positioned and locked in place, I'll be able to start measuring the more precise elements of the lock. So what I have on the table is a metal plate that I'm going to be using as the back plate for the lock. The entire lock is going to be assembled on this back plate, and then when I'm done, I'm going to mount the plate onto the lid of the box. So the outside surface of the box is going to be clean. It's not going to have any of the rivets that are holding the entire lock together. They're going to be on an internal layer of the lid. As you can see, I already have a few of the major layout lines in place. The bottom line is the position for the push rod, and it's a straight edge because it travels along that line. The push rod is in its starting position on the right side of the lock, and then the faint line that you see to the left of the push rod is the amount that it travels in the lock to open the mechanism. Now that I have the outline of the push rod drawn onto the plate, I can move it aside and start working with the bolts to get them located. The two bolts for the side of the lock are on the same plane, so I've drawn that line in here. The height of that line is determined by the position of the bolt on the right-hand side of the lock, because it needs to connect directly to the vertical arm of the push rod. So once I have that worked out, I scribe a line directly across the plate, and I know that the bolt on the left-hand side of the lock is going to fall somewhere along that line. The position of the bolt on the left-hand side of the lock isn't critical. You just want to make sure that it's over far enough so that there's lots of room for the mechanism on that side. So once I have the location of those two bolts determined, finding the position of the center bolt is simply a matter of dividing that space in two. I still need to do a little bit of experimenting to find the exact location of this bolt, but I know it's going to be somewhere on this line. So once I have the bolts roughly in place on the plate, I want to start working out the location of the arms that are going to be used to push the bolts back into a locked position. So each bolt needs to have its own lever, and each lever is under spring tension, and that spring tension is what returns the lock to a locked position when you remove the key. If I hold the push rod over top of the mechanism, you can see how the vertical arm of the push rod gets tied directly to the bolt on the right-hand side of the lock. Each lever has its own spring, and the spring is going to be mounted so that the end pushes up against the lever right near the pivot point. So you can see the center bolt has been raised up from its original scribe line, and that's to give me a little bit more room in between the lever and the top of the push rod. Now that I'm satisfied that this arrangement is going to allow me to finish the lock, I can start actually drilling holes and locking things in position. The first thing that I need to do is to remove all the parts from the back plate and reinforce any modifications or adjustments that I made to my original layout. And I'm not doing anything complicated here. I'm just scribing a heavy line for the new location, and I'm scratching out the old mark. The height of the center bolt is really the only line that I'm concerned about right now, because it doesn't have a hard connection with anything else. The other lines I really don't need anymore, because as I start installing pieces, they're just going to start becoming unnecessary, because the location of one piece is going to determine the location of the next piece. So if I have the basic outlines right, everything else is just going to fall into place. I'm going to be starting by installing the lever for the bolt on the right-hand side of the lock. I need to make sure that the pivot point for this lever is far enough to the left so it doesn't interfere with the push rod when it's opening the lock. So I'm doing this one first so I make sure that I don't forget about that. As it happens, the material that I used for the lever is exactly the same width as the amount that the push rod travels. So as long as I can fit one of those in between, I have lots of room. And then it's just a matter of marking it, center punching it, and drilling it. The lever for the bolt on the left-hand side of the lock doesn't need to be angled for any reason, but because I have the one on the right angled to avoid the mechanism, I need to angle this one just to maintain the symmetry of the lock. The lever for the bolt in the center of the lock is just going to be mounted horizontally. When the lock is done, I'll be riveting everything in place. Here I'm a little further along. I have the holes drilled on the plate, and I have installed some bolts that I can use to temporarily install all the parts. This will allow me to remove anything, make any adjustments, and quickly put it back in place. The next lever that I'm going to be installing is the one that operates the bolt for the center of the lid. But I first need to modify this lever to get it to work properly. This is a problem I created when I changed the location of the bolt for the center of the lock. When I shifted the bolt upwards, this lever naturally had to follow along with that bolt, and in doing that, it changed the proportion of this lever. Basically, I need to set it up the way I have it positioned right now. I need both arms of this lever to be the same length to work properly in the lock. So I need to move everything over to the left so the bolt lines back up on the center line, and then I have to curve the bottom leg of the lever so that it can reach over to the push rod. I'm going to be using a set of dividers to find the location of the pivot point. The length of the arm goes from the center of the horizontal portion of the push rod to the point where it connects with the bolt. And then I'll scribe my first arc by anchoring one leg of the dividers at the point where the lever connects with the push rod. And the second arc is drawn from the center line to where it intersects the first arc. So that puts the lever roughly in this position. You can see how the bottom of the lever needs to be curved over so it touches the push rod. And here's the lever forged out and in position on the plate. The last lever that I want to install today is the one that's going to operate the bolt for the left-hand side of the lock. This lever also needs to have both of its arms the same length. So I'm drawing in the vertical reference line for where this lever is going to be located, and then I'm just going to use a pair of dividers and divide the distance between the bolt and the push rod in half. The length of these arms don't have to be the same length as the other lever. I just have to make sure that they have a 1-to-1 ratio. So whatever happens on one side of the lever isn't magnified or reduced on the other side of the lever. So I get the same amount of movement on each side. And here's the lock a little further along. I have that lever in place and the push rod is trimmed to length. So this will give you an idea how the parts work together. Next time I'll be cutting the joints that actually connect the bolts to the lock mechanism, and I'll be installing all of the guide blocks. So it'll be basically a working lock at that point. Hi, I'm Dennis, and thanks for watching. If you're interested in supporting this channel, the simplest way, of course, is to like, comment, and subscribe. If you have questions and you want to contact me directly, you can do so by emailing me at either one of the addresses that I have listed here. It may take me a couple of days, but I will get back to you. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.